In my opinion, NASCAR is kind of setting an odd precedent. Maybe not a bad one, just one that is kind of confusing. And I'll get into it right here. So, Denny Hamlin was penalized 25 points for intentionally wrecking Ross Chastain, as well as being fined $50,000. He admitted to it on his podcast, Actions Detrimental, and because of it, it seems like NASCAR had the ammunition to give the penalty away. But to me, this is kind of odd, because we've seen before where there's been plenty of guys intentionally wrecked in revenge, and they're not penalized. And listen, it doesn't take much skill to take somebody out or to slide them into a wall and glue them up there while the pack goes by. It doesn't take all that much. But what's odd is that over and over again, drivers have done the same kinds of things and not been penalized because, honestly, it seems like because they haven't been honest about it. They just say, well, my brakes went out or this or that, unless it's an egregious spin like Clint Bowyer in 2013, or an egregious crash like Matt Kenseth with Joey Logano in 2015, nothing is really done about it. And it's not really the first time in recent history this has been done as well. Bubba Wallace in 2019 had intentionally spun at Texas to bring out a caution flag, and he fully admitted to it in this clip here.
You did what again?
I learned from Brad and Joey.
So are you worried about anything or?
Like what? Until they do anything, no. I'm not the only one to do it.
Yeah.
Like I'm racing for myself, not for Larson, not for Chevrolet. At that moment, for myself, I'm going multiple laps down.
Okay.
Now, a very similar instance happened almost 20 years ago with Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 2004 at Bristol. Jr. had been running pretty good all day, but towards the end of the race, started really falling back for seemingly no good reason. Spinning the car out, he managed to bring out a caution while staying on the lead lap where the team could fix the issue. And he fully admitted to it over the radio and in interviews and was fined 25 points and $10,000. So what I'm kind of saying here is the takeaway for this, it seems like, is that, well, admit to it and you get to be penalized for it. Have honesty, show any personality with it, you get penalized. Now, I want to also say, before going any further, that I do think Dale Jr. and Bubba Wallace should have been penalized in those instances, and I do think that Bubba Wallace should have been penalized at Las Vegas. Denny Hamlin's a bit more iffy, as I think that it wasn't as egregious as spinning somebody out in front of the field, but at the same time, pretty classless move by a, well, championship contending driver who never can seem to get the job done. Denny, like I said, is more iffy, because if you tell drivers that you really can't do all that much here or there, or there's a limit to what you can do, it goes against another thing that NASCAR's talked about, the drivers policing themselves. NASCAR has over and over again said that they'll leave it to the drivers. They'll leave it to the drivers to make up their rules, to keep each other in check, and it's kind of become the wild, wild west along with this playoff format we have. It all feeds into itself. NASCAR has said this, but if a driver talks about the intent of policing something themselves, like Denny Hamlin did, they get a penalty. You see where there's the big discrepancy here for me? I think that NASCAR is walking into a giant contradiction. They tell these drivers they can do whatever they want, but then don't give them the parameters to not do something. They even talked about giving a penalty before Hamlin even admitted to it. And Hamlin admitting to it, though, seems to be what has been the catalyst for this penalty being a slam dunk easy give. And I think that over time, it's going to give a lot of unintended consequences for NASCAR itself, as well as how the drivers act. See, if a driver talks about intent, like Bubba, Denny, or Dale Jr. did, what could the precedent be? Well, questionable stuff, I think. Questionable whether it comes to how drivers act to the media, how drivers act on track with each other. I think you're going to see with it a bit of a toned back approach by drivers. Why would they go out on a limb to do this if it hurts their championship efforts, or it hurts their season-long efforts, hurts their race efforts? Why would they do that if this is the precedent NASCAR is setting? It seems like the line that NASCAR's going with is do crazy stuff, do weird stuff, do stuff that is entertaining to watch. Just don't ever admit to doing that kind of stuff and say it was just a racing incident and completely gloss over it. The problem, in my opinion, is that drivers especially will be more guarded against the media. And this has happened before in NASCAR, though for a different catalyst reason. NASCAR drivers into the 90s and the 2000s were starting to gain traction in the mainstream. NASCAR was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and these drivers were, in turn, also growing in stature. And with it, NASCAR wanted to get away from that redneck NASCAR mentality that many people had about the sport. They didn't want stereotypes. They wanted squeaky clean drivers that'd be friendly for brands and advertisers and wouldn't go too far over the line. The stuff that Tony Stewart did back then was considered very, very overboard for a NASCAR driver. And honestly, the stuff he did back then is stuff that modern NASCAR drivers do every season. But it was seen as an odd thing to do back then. It was seen as going over the line for being over-aggressive in any way. And NASCAR even penalized for simply bumping too much at super speedways, for instance. So you see how this happened over time, where by the mid-2000s, most drivers were just walking vanilla billboards, thanking their sponsors, talking about their great Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge, Toyota, whatever it is, and not being a human being. It was a big, big complaint about many drivers, one of which was Jimmie Johnson. It's a big reason why Jimmie Johnson isn't as appreciated now as many other great drivers are. It's because he basically came up in the Cup Series at the time of just keeping your head down, doing everything you could, don't show too much emotion, and if you do, shut it down within a week, and then thank your sponsors for everything that goes on. And that's what could happen here if NASCAR doesn't get in front of this before making this a problem. You're going to see media gun shyness that is just like the 2000s, and you're going to see terrible vanilla personalities that nobody can really attach to unless you already were rooting for that driver. This is why I find it odd. NASCAR wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want drivers who are completely perfect in front of the media, don't admit to anything that would be considered stereotypical, but then also want them to do crazy stuff on track so that they can get the giant ratings boosts, the big media coverage, basically what happened with the Hail Melon last year. So what is the solution to this? Because I don't want to bitch into the void and just complain and complain. What is the solution? And the thing is, I think it's a difficult part to look at. And I think it's only going to get more difficult the more and more inconsistency that NASCAR shows with this. There's a couple ways. One, you can just go full on boys have at it again. Have it be the wild, wild west. NASCAR stays on the sidelines and you have basically guys taking each other out in a slug match each week. I don't think that's necessarily the greatest thing, as it could lead to a lot of what we have been seeing where drivers go overboard, like Bubba Wallace did last year at Las Vegas, like Matt Kenseth did with Joey Logano in 2015. So I don't necessarily think that is the solution. Now, you could do ball and strike calls where NASCAR just guesses the intent, and if it seems like based on telemetry, the way the driver had turned their wheel towards another car, that it was intentional or not, you penalize based on that and based on the severity. Basically what NASCAR does now and what pisses off the fans even more. So that's not really an easy option. Another one is that if a driver causes a wreck, no matter what kind of wreck, you fundamentally change how the race is governed. And you do it more like local short tracks do. For instance, my local short track used to basically send you to the back of the longest line if you were to cause a wreck, even if it was unintentional. It promoted having good, clean racing while still having hard racing at that. If it's at the end of the race, you send them to the tail end of the lead lap or whichever lap they are on. If not that, you disqualify them. I don't like all that either, and I think it fundamentally changes how NASCAR is. So that's why I say the solution is difficult. You can merge all three of these together. Maybe if you intentionally crash somebody, you get parked, kind of like what NASCAR does today. If it seems like you did it, but they don't know for sure, they send you to the back of the longest line, or they just do ball and strike calls, or they also have drivers police themselves on smaller issues. That is kind of what could happen. But I want to ask you, what do you think NASCAR should do about this? Or do you think nothing's wrong and keep it as is? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members as well for your support. And until next time, have a good one.